Thanks for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute, and with me is Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems.
Think back to the last time you negotiated with a customer. How did it go? Were you disappointed with the results? Did you feel like the customer won and you lost? Or did you feel like you got the better side of the deal? Could you have done better? And is there a way that both you and the client would be satisfied with the final contract? Scott and I are pleased to welcome Michael Gregory to discuss these important questions about negotiating closure and other great ideas on episode 466 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
All right, thanks for joining us. We're going to cover chapter 5 of the Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play book. This is another great chapter, Bill. And,
my gosh.
So much detail.
It's like a playbook.
It is.
If you're not following this playbook, there are a lot of questions and issues you're missing.
And they just really, I find that this, even though this book was written in 1990s, late 1990s, it is so relevant in today's marketplace. And that's not very common in some sales books. So they've really put together a great process here. And we're going to talk about the decision process.
Yep. And if you don't like process, don't buy this book.
Yeah, right.
If you like flying by the seat of your pants and hoping you get the right questions and maybe talk to the right people, don't buy this book. It'll drive you crazy. But if you want to know the right questions to ask and a process to follow that will get you everything you need to know, this book is going to do it for you.
Yeah, it really concentrates on 3 key abilities: articulating and influencing the decision process, gaining access to key stakeholders, and understanding the decision criteria. And within that decision process, I really liked how they laid out the decision process. And the first part is steps. So we know what steps the prospect is going to go through, the buyer is going to go through. And then the next is, what is the decision? So the decisions get made at each step. So we know what decisions are made, and they have a great chart on a few of these pages as to how they go through and apply this concept.
And you know how the salesperson finds out what the decision process is?
They go along for the ride. They have no idea.
No. They ask questions, and the client will generally say, well, here's how we do it.
And it's so important to ask that question early on in the sales conversation. And it just sounds real simple. It's a real simple question. I said, in the past, how have you gone about making decisions like this? And you're not saying, do you make the decision? That's a closed-ended question. And of course, they'll always say, yes, I'm the final decision maker. And that's not always true.
That's right.
And, keep in mind, you have to be talking to a person that makes decisions, not a person that follows decisions, because those are two different people. And, the next step is when are you going to make all of, so what process are you going to go through on a timeline when making these decisions? So that was the third one.
Does it have to be done by a certain time? Is there something pressing you to get this started?
Yeah. And then who? And I really love how they laid out all of the different people in the organization. And they stress something I think that was really important is do not confuse organizational authority with buying authority, which is so true in today's marketplace. And we can't confuse the two. And we think that the decision maker is going to be making the final decision when in reality, they may be the ratifier. They approve the decision, which is a lot different than making the decision.
I think we've seen and we've talked about the idea that these decisions are getting pushed much more towards committees than individuals. And you really have to know who all the players are, or you're going to miss something.
Yeah, going in our way back time capsule, the Challenger sale. This is one of the 2 differences that the Challenger sale talked about in today's marketplace. Is number 1, on the Challenger sale, they said, don't ask the question, what's keeping you up at night? Bring up the question or the statement, here's what should be keeping you up at night. So that's 1. And the relationship is different. So we're not having a relationship builder, we're having a Challenger sale conversation. And the second is, the people at the top, the CEOs, are turning over the decisions to the people that work in the channel within that department, because the CEO wants the committee to take ownership of it. And once they own it and they're responsible for it, they're going to be more committed to following a process, which is what this book covers perfectly in this chapter.
And I like he also says, don't just try to know the decision-making process. You need to be able to influence that decision-making process.
Yeah.
You need to be able to say, I understand what you're trying to do, but I'm going to need to talk to these people. In order for this to work well, perhaps we should do these things also. And you can influence that process, because if that trust has been built up earlier on in the conversation, then you can have an influencing aspect or effect on that process.
Right. I wrote down in my notes, change the process and priorities to play to your strengths.
Mm-hmm.
This is just like following an RFP. You get an RFP and you just answer all the questions. You're not really standing out at all. When you restructure the RFP to play to your advantages, bring up things that the prospect or the buyer didn't think about, now you're being that resource. Now you're being that person that is a full-time player in a part-time game. The buyer is a part-time player. You're the full-time player.
Go back to the very first chapter in this book where he illustrated the idea of just answering RFPs and not getting to talk to all the key decision makers. And they found that if you could just talk to one person, it made your RFP much more useful or made a better decision. The company he was working with spent millions of dollars just answering blank RFPs. So you've got to get to those stakeholders.
And one thing that the chapter brought out is, what information do you want to know? So really get the questions and the information that you want to know, which defines the questions that you ask. If you don't know what you want to know, then you don't know what questions to ask. And they went through a whole list of questions to ask, which are all very relevant in every conversation when it comes to a prospect.
I thought a very valuable tool that they put in this too, and this was in the gaining access to key stakeholders. He gave about 7 or 8 objections, and this is on pages 105 to 110. Things like, I'll do it for you. I'll talk to that stakeholder for you. Just follow the RFP and answer the questions there. And he gave some good objections and ways to overcome those. So I don't want to go into all of those overcoming objections, but I think those are important tools to have, and how we can reframe their issues and actually make their objection the reason that they ought to give us access.
One of the things they mentioned is how to go around the person that you're talking with, knowing that they're, I think, what do we call them before? They're spoiling it, or they want to kill the deal. What we talked about in a past episode,
right.
And how to go around that person and do it tactfully. And you really have to decide if it's worth the risk or not. I love the line in the book, how we sell is a free sample of how we solve. So how are we selling our service and product is a great example of how we solve a problem. Are we respectful of the other person's time? Do we want to get to the point? Do we want to ask good questions? Do we want to focus on what's relevant? That is all in the process of sales, which is how you solve and serve your clients and prospects.
And the final piece was understanding decision criteria. And that's knowing that each stakeholder may have a different way they're making the decision, or a different piece that's important to them. And you have to find that out and find out what their decision criteria is. So then you can show them how your product or service is going to answer that criteria. And if you don't find that out, then you're just, as we say, telling we're not selling, right? We're just throwing stuff against the wall and hoping okay, that's interesting. That's what I'm looking for.
I love the line, and I'll close with this, is they talked about fairness. And if we gave you access to a stakeholder or decision maker, then we'd have to give everybody else access. And the great response was, if fairness is the reason for not doing it, can fairness be the reason for doing it? Our fairness is not to outside vendors. Our fairness is to the shareholders and the stakeholders of the company. And to really fight for something, not fight about something, was also in the book. So just a great line and a great example and a great focus of, look, we want to be fair to you, the stakeholders. I mean, we want to be able to have access to the people who are going to be involved in making decisions, using the services, how it's going to impact other people in the company, and then prescribe the exact solution, as the book uses that term.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to leave with is, if you're not using tracking documents, and there's many examples in this book of tracking documents, you're going to get lost in a complex sale. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of decisions being made, there's a lot of contacts that have to be made. So develop some tracking documents for yourself so that you can get hold and know where you are in this process of moving this sale forward.
This segment has been brought to you by the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program, presented by your host of the Winning at Selling podcast. Every professional athlete has a coach, someone to assist and advise. Tiger Woods had 4 swing coaches so that he could stay at the top of his game. What would you like to improve or overcome in the next year? Perhaps as a salesperson, you want to be more productive with your prospecting, overcoming objections, or delivering more effective presentations. As a sales manager, you want to create a spark within your sales team with a new message, a refreshed approach to starting new conversations with prospects, or you are looking for market-ready strategies to increase revenue and shorten the sales cycle with your existing team. Or as a business leader, you want to transform the sales culture and your value proposition for the new marketplace. Whatever your reason, this is the perfect time to engage with an experienced sales coach. That is why your hosts of Winning at Selling podcast, Professor Scott Plum and Bill Hellkamp, have developed the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program. Now you can receive personal coaching from the same sales professionals you enjoy on this podcast. It all starts with a discussion to give us insights into your specific goals, challenges, needs, and motivation. Go to winningatselling.com to contact Bill or Scott about the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program. Do you believe you deserve better results? Now is the time to invest in yourself, your people, and your customers, and invest in your future.
All right, well, welcome back, and we are very excited to have a guest today with us, Michael Gregory. Michael has conducted over 2,500 mediations and negotiations during his career on issues up to $1 billion with Fortune 100 companies. He's a qualified mediator with the Minnesota Supreme Court and is on the board of the Minnesota State Bar Association Alternative Dispute Resolution Section. That's a mouthful. Mike is the founder of Michael Gregory Consulting, LLC, which focuses on enhancing collaboration to make firms more productive, profitable, and have more fun. Mike has written 12 books, including The Collaboration Effect, Peaceful Resolution, and The Servant Manager. Mike, welcome to the Winning at Selling podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure and privilege to be with you today.
Well, we're very excited to talk about negotiation. Scott and I, we argue about this a little bit.
I was going to bring that up too.
Go ahead.
This is a topic that Bill and I have different perspectives or opinions on.
And Scott's wrong, so that's okay. He doesn't realize how wrong he is.
In context, I am wrong. In some context, I am right. And context is so important when it comes to sales and negotiations. So it's all about the context.
Scott thinks that if people learn negotiating skills, they'll just negotiate on price alone.
Right.
And I think if they learn negotiating skills, they'll have other alternatives than price alone. So,
yeah.
So Mike, in your material, you talk about negotiating closure, and then you have a book called Peaceful Resolutions. Tell us more about your philosophy toward negotiations.
Well, another book that I also have is called The Collaboration Effect.
Okay.
And what I would say is in both of these books, Peaceful Resolutions and The Collaboration Effect, I'm continually learning. So it isn't that this is it, now I've got it, and here are all the answers. But what I look at is it's about building trust. And that's a foundation. And to build trust, you need to have connecting relationships, listen actively, and educate judiciously. And that builds bridges to negotiate closure. What you have is interests, and they have interests. And when we can address interests, we can work towards solutions. You don't want to be a problem solver. You want to be a solution provider. You want to understand what it is they have with their concerns, and you're going to work with them. Now, I have to say, given what you just said with each other on philosophies on negotiating, I read Scott's book over the weekend.
Oh,
Taking Off into the Wind.
Oh, yeah.
And after I read his book, I came back with, he has phrases like, the number one rule in sales is it's about them. And I have a commentary with respect to listening that it's not about me. It's all about we. But it starts with me. And the me part is we're going to build a connecting relationship, and we can talk about that in more detail here with your questions. But on the listening component, just on it's about them, it's you want to be more interested in them. Focus on being interested in them, not on being interesting. You want to listen and check your assumptions. You want to get curious. You want to suspend judgment. If someone has been listened to, they're far more apt to listen to you. Let that sink in. If someone's been listened to, they're far more apt to listen to you. You just said you want to influence the process with your comment on let's get real or let's not play.
Yeah.
And you said you want to bring up things. You want to ask questions. What do you want to know? And you think about that ahead of time. And so you have to think about what do you want? You need to ask for it. To do that, you had to beforehand do research on who are these people? What are their values? How can I connect with them? And then you thought of what are 3 benefits for them before you ever met with them. And you wrote them down.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the benefits. But once you've actually connected with them and listened to them, those benefits might be the same or they might be something different. And then when you explain the benefits, what we need to do is just be quiet and listen to them and address what their interests are. You have all this knowledge as a salesperson that you want to tell them because you know all this material. The reality is you want to educate them the way they want to be educated. So what are their concerns? So that's my opening commentary of those are some things to think about in terms of you're working towards closure, but that's the end result. To get there, it's about connecting relationships, listening actively, and educating judiciously. Then the closure part's going to come. So that's what I mean when I talk about building bridges to negotiate closure.
Excellent.
Wow. Mike, thanks again for being with us. And you are definitely a product of the product. I remember our first meeting that we got together, you were intensively listening when you were asking questions and finding out more and more about me. I mean, it was almost uncomfortable because it's so rare that ever happens where somebody asks me so many questions that I'm sharing so much information. And it definitely makes an impression on a person that you're meeting with. Our listeners are obviously salespeople. And Bill and I have always debated what negotiation is and how can salespeople negotiate and work on increasing their closing ratio, or what are some of the things that they can adopt?
Well, I have a keynote presentation and I have meeting planners that call me. And just as you talked about how things are moving today, there's a pre-meeting planner, there's a meeting planner, and then it goes to a committee. And the committee makes a decision who's going to give a keynote.
Mm-hmm.
And my top keynote is, how do you make uncomfortable situations comfortable? I'm just sharing that.
Yeah.
So when I think about what you just said, and we're talking about salespeople, I have to get through the pre-meeting planner, the meeting planner, and get to the committee. And then the committee has to know what kind of value I can bring. And in the end, I'm down to 3 people. If I can make it into those 3, I feel a very high probability, 90% plus, I will be the keynote speaker.
I believe it.
I'll ask all kinds of questions each step along the way. I'm asking them questions. In fact, next to me here, I have about 20 questions written down in 3 different, on each of 3 different pieces of paper. So if I'm talking to the pre-meeting planner, these are the kind of questions I want to ask. I'm talking to the meeting planner, these are the questions I want to ask. I'm talking to members of the committee, these are questions I'm going to ask. And I'm going to let them know the kind of research I'm going to do. So I come back with, I would say the first thing is you have to be prepared. You have to do your own research up front on who you're meeting with and why and what's going to happen. And it all comes down to this first element I talked about on connecting relationships. So I'm going to tell you a story. I'll tell you 2 stories. One story, I had an accountant who said, you know, you talked about all this stuff, Mike, but if I'm just having a telephone call, I'm calling up somebody on the IRS and I'm a CPA, it took me a half an hour to an hour to get through to this person. And I need them to answer a question for me. And they answer it in 3 or 4 minutes. It might be right or wrong. Typically it's wrong. And how can I possibly get any help from the IRS? And I said, when you call the IRS person, you need to realize that only 7% of the attitude is from the words, but 38% of the attitude comes from the tone and 55% from facial expression and body language. Now you only have the tone. So when that person answers the phone, I want you to respond to them with their tone. You have to realize that that person who's answering the phone at the IRS, they get sworn at 3 or 4 times every day. I could not do that job personally. But when you call and they answer the phone and they're going to say something like, hi, Mike Gregory, badge number 4167472, can I help you? When you hear that tone, now you've been waiting a half an hour to an hour, so you're kind of ticked because you've waited so long. But that last person might have just sworn the heck out of that poor IRS guy. So I want you to say something like this. Are you doing okay today? Or how are things going with you? And pause. And listen to the response back. Once you've developed even that relationship with that little question that you asked, then ask your question. And I got a call back from a person once. I made a presentation to a bunch of CPAs. He said, Mike, you won't believe this. I called up the IRS. I did that. I did exactly that. And the person said, yeah, it's been a tough day. And so I empathized with them for just a minute or two. And then he said, now how can I help you? And I told him what I wanted. And he went and he said, I can't answer it, but I think this other person can. And he sent me to somebody, and it didn't happen. And it didn't happen. And the third one finally did. I was on the phone for 45 minutes before I got to the right person, and he answered that question. And I said to him, so that person took 45 minutes of time and transferred you 3 times to get the right answer? Yeah. I said, did you know he got in trouble for that? He said, what do you mean? He's supposed to have an average time on call for 4 minutes. You were on for 45 minutes. His supervisor is going to say to him, why were you on that call so long? He's going to have to explain that to his supervisor. But he did that because what did you do? In less than 2 minutes, you connected with that person because you empathized with them and you developed a relationship just based on the tone, and you're reflecting and empathizing with him on the tone. Another example I'm going to give you is I gave this presentation again. How do you make uncomfortable situations comfortable to a large organization? And I had someone call me on the phone about 2 weeks later and said, I have problems with procurement. And I go to work with this procurement person, and she's a bitter person. She's angry. Whenever I go there, I just don't even want to go over to her area. And I'm coming over there to ask her to do something, and this needs to be a rush item. And she doesn't want to do it. I know she doesn't want to do it. She doesn't want to see me. And I said, and I gave them this recipe of connecting, listening, educating. And so she said, I took your advice, Mike, and I walked over to her cube. I just looked in her cube and I saw some pictures of some little kids. And I said, oh, are those your grandchildren? When I walked up, I said, oh, are those your grandchildren? And she looked up at me and she said, yeah. And then I just asked questions about her grandchildren. That's all I did. I just asked questions about her grandchildren. And she started telling about her grandchildren, how proud she was of them and where they live. And she gets to see them and all this different stuff and on and on. And after a few minutes, she was very positive. And she said, by the way, what'd you come over here for? And the person said, I came over to see if you could do this. And I'm sorry, but it's a rush item. I wonder if you can get this done. She, oh, I'll be happy to do it. I've got this thing I'm working on right now, but I'll get that done for you right after I do this. And she did it.
Yeah.
And that woman called me up and said, Mike, I'm calling you because for years I've had a problem with this person. And I just listened to your presentation. And then I took that on connecting relationships, listening actively. Then she asked me what she could do for me, and she did it. And I apologized for being so quick to get done, and she did it. So think about these elements when you're involved with selling, of you trying to understand them. Your comment of it's about them. My comment is it's about we, and then it's not about me. It's all about we, but it starts with me, and that's me saying I'm going to make the decision to want to try and help them with whatever their concern is. I'm going to listen to them.
You mentioned procurement, and in sales, we obviously end up talking to procurement quite often. And in negotiating with them or with some other people, it seems that price is their only objective, to get our price down, right? How can we negotiate effectively with somebody who only has one tool in their toolbox and that's all they want to talk about?
Okay, I'm talking with a meeting planner here again. Here I am in my role. And they are interested in price. And they want to have me come in and be a speaker, but at the lowest price possible, right? So I need to what? Ask them questions. You brought up on influencing the process of bringing up things. So you want to ask them, well, I can just see myself with your situation. In my situation, I'm going to ask them with, well, how many people are going to be there? And where are they coming from? What's the theme of the conference? And what do you want me to focus on? And how can I help you? What would make this a successful conference in your mind? I'm going to ask them all kinds of questions. Now, I don't know what area of sales that we're in, but I'm just going to take this comment of it's all about price. Okay, I'm going to ask them, does it matter in terms of when they get delivered? Does it matter in terms of the quality of what's presented? Are you interested in just this one item, or you think you might be interested in other items? Are you interested in just this short time, one time, or in and out, or are you interested in something long term? What I want to do is I want to get them thinking that I'm thinking out for them. I'm looking out for them. In this one case, they might be focused on price, and it might be just a one-time deal with them, or it might be something that you're trying to build a relationship towards future sales. So think about what we just went through with the chapter you went on, let's get real or let's not play, and the comments you made on who it is you're talking to, and what are their interests with whoever you're speaking to,
Mm.
and what can you do to build the relationship with that person? What do you know about them? And I mean, before I work with anybody today, I research them on the internet. So I look at LinkedIn, I look at Facebook, I look at Reddit, I look at a number of different sources. I Google them, and I want to learn as much as I can about them. And I can say things to about where they went to school, where they live. I might learn things about family members. I can learn all kinds of different things. When I learn those things, I'm going to see, is there some way I can weave those in? I'm going to try and make a human contact. The first element on the collaboration effect is connecting relationships. So for talking to an attorney, for example, I'll say, where'd you go for undergrad? Where'd you go to grad school? Where'd you grow up? Where do you live now? Are you a morning or afternoon person? Do you drink coffee? If you do, what kind of coffee? What do you like to do for fun? These small talk elements that you may think don't matter are going to help to build the relationship and build trust. And if I've learned some of these ahead of time, I can bring up things like, well, how long have you lived in South Carolina? How do you like living in Charleston? I can address different components so that I'm not just a number. I'm not just producing something relative to a quantity and price. I'm a human being here, and they're a human being here. And you think they want to work with somebody that they have a relationship with, or someone who's just, I'll give you the lowest price, and lowest price might be with that the worst quality. So when you ask things like them, well, does it matter in terms of, and I don't know what I'm selling, I'm just going to call them widgets. Does it matter in terms of the widgets, how long they last? Does it matter in terms of the widgets of timeliness on delivery? Does it matter with the widgets on, I don't know what, but I'll think of different things relative to why is my product differentiated from others? And I'm not going to say my product is differentiated because of this. Rather, I'm going to say, do those things matter? And you can come back and say why your product is better. But you want to be asking them questions rather than telling them the answers. You want to ask them questions so that they're going to be thinking, and then you can help lead in a given direction with the questions you're answering. You're going to influence the process because you've developed the relationship. You've listened to them with what are their concerns. And sometimes their concerns might just be price and quantity, and we're done, that's it. But I'm going to say, in my mind, that is a definite minority. They start that way with me as a meeting planner or the assistant meeting planner, and then the meeting planner, and then the committee. They all start that way. What's your price? And here's what we want, and can you do that? And the reality is, when I get done asking them questions, they see value added because of the questions I've asked them. And they can tell, I'm going to tell them up front, for my keynote, I would like to talk to 6 people in your organization for just at least 10 minutes, because I want to have the jargon of your organization. I want to understand the questions and concerns of your people. And I'm going to bring that into my presentation. Now, how many people who are professional speakers like me tell these folks, I want to speak to 6 people for at least 10 minutes? And then I tell them, in reality, when I speak with your people, it won't be 10 minutes. It'll probably be a half an hour, because most of them, I'm going to just be asking them questions. And the fact that they're being listened to, like you talked, Scott, that if you really listen to people, they will tell you a lot.
Yeah, they will.
So they actually spend 20 minutes or half an hour with me because I asked for 10 minutes, but because I'm asking questions, they want to talk and share those things.
Mike, in talking with salespeople, one of their biggest challenges that they have is prospects don't call them back. They leave messages and they don't call them back. And in negotiations, this is, they go dark. The other side goes dark, or they don't respond. What are some of the things that salespeople can do to kind of move the process along and get a prospect to return a phone call or give them some kind of a response?
I work off the number 3. So like the collaboration effect is 3 things, right? Connecting relationships, listening actively, educating judiciously. Or I said, know what you want, ask for it, have 3 reasons why it's beneficial for them. When I think of contacts, I think of contacting people 3 times. I really do. I learned this early on. I've been in business now for 10 years with my firm, Michael Gregory Consulting. And one of my mentors said, you got to get in front of 5 people a week. And I went like, holy smokes, how do I get in front of 5 people a week? And he helped me figure out who these people might be. And then I said, okay, I have to try and reach them. And he said, Mike, try to reach them 3 times. So what am I going to do? I'm going to call. When I call, normally they're not going to pick up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a message. And then what I've also done is I've got a name and I've got a location. And quite likely I can figure out an email. So I'm going to email them. And when I email them, I'm going to offer to say, I'd like to take, this is for me, this is what I do. I'd like to take you out for coffee or lunch. And nothing comes back, let's say, from the email. Well, I went to half price books. I bought a bunch of cards. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a handwritten note and said, I called you, I emailed you, I just want to get together with you for coffee or lunch. I'm wondering if we could get together. And I put my card in there with my contact information. Cost me a 50-cent stamp. And I mail that out. Well, if I've contacted them 3 times and they haven't responded to me, we're done. I tried it 3 times. But I'm willing to try it up to 3 times with somebody when I'm trying to reach them. And I even had one person once, after I contacted them 3 times, they called me and said, Mike, I'm just calling you out of respect because of your persistence, but I'm telling you, I don't have anything here that you can ever help us with. And I just wanted to call and say, I appreciate your persistence, but you don't need to contact me anymore. Because the person was kind of annoyed I called them 3 times. Well, 3 months later, that person called me up and I entered into a contract with that firm and through that person, and that person remembered who I was. So I look at it as you've got to have a thick skin and be able to understand when somebody says talk to the hand and the answer is no, move on. That's just all you can do, move on. But my technique of the call, the email, and sending off a note to them, a handwritten note, how many people do that?
Right.
Not very many.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so
that
they're
persistence.
thinking, given this guy is that persistent, maybe I should give this guy at least an opportunity. And then sometimes all I got back was a call, but I initiated the relationship. And then I put them into my data set. My data set today is about 7,400 people. This is 10 years later. But I've got a data set today of some 7,400 contacts. And I put in all that contact information. And you mentioned earlier in your commentary, you need to keep a list. You need to keep who the folks are you're interacting with. You get into a complex negotiation, who are the different players and what are their roles? Well, it's the same thing for me in terms of who are my contacts. And some of these contacts with different organizations, I have 2, 3, and 4 names of different people on this one given contact list for who does what and who's the influencer, who's the decision maker, et cetera, with what you just talked about on let's get real or let's not play, to know who's who. So I haven't read the book, and I just spoke earlier today with Bill. He told me this book, Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. I'm going to buy the book because, yes, I can very easily wing it and freewheel it and go. I can. But I really like to understand process. And if I understand process and I can apply the lessons I just gave you on, for example, contacts, I can then come back and say, what can I do, or what do I want to remember, or how can I make it simple for me? And then how can I apply that and make use of it with what I do? And I think others can do the same thing, whatever makes sense to them.
Mike, in working with salespeople, why does attitude matter in negotiations, and what kind of attitude should salespeople have?
Well, I love your question. I have in front of me a book. It's written by a friend of mine, Manny Steele. He goes by Dr. Lyman Steele. And he wrote this book on listening leaders, the 10 golden rules to listen, lead, and succeed. And in his book, he has a simple model. It's called ASK, A-S-K. And the A is attitude, and the S and K are skills and knowledge. So on attitude, the key here is your own attitude. And your attitude needs to be positive, can do, want to help. That's a bottom line. You want to help. If you're out to get sales because you want to get sales and make money, this is not for you. Mm-hmm. If you want to be successful, and along with that comes sales, then I think the attitude of you're there to help, you're there to be a servant, you're there to understand what their concerns are. When I sometimes am contacting various parties, I might ask them, they know me, I ask them, what do you want to talk about today? What's on your mind? What have you been thinking about? And then just listen.
Yeah, that's great.
Silence there.
Yeah, I like that ask model because that is a real key to looking at the skills of people, you know, and I've used that for 30 years as I open most of my training programs. And I ask the question, write down somebody you admire and what you admire about them. And it's like 90% attitude, right? We don't admire skills and knowledge as much as we admire people's attitude. And that's what really stands out. So Do you have a list or some way of helping salespeople know what's the information they should have before they go into a negotiation?
I have a handout on negotiation,
Okay.
and I have a handout on de-escalation. If someone's already upset or something, how can we de-escalate that so we can get to a neutral position to go on? But in my book, The Collaboration Effect, I have the practice of 7 key points of negotiation. And it starts off, prepare with research. So you're asking, do I have, what are all the different kinds of research, a checklist in that sense? No, I don't. But you begin with, you've got to do research. I talked about doing this on LinkedIn, on other sources, on internet in general. And then with people you know, what do you know about these people? Your own network, what do they know about them? Or even outside your network, to others, can they refer you to someone who knows something about them? And then you're going to provide a relationship. You want to be in an enhancing relationship environment of wherever it is you're going to have the contact. Could be going to coffee, could be going to lunch, a virtual meeting. And you begin with socialization. It's all about connecting relationships with the socialization. And then you need to be actively listening and be humble and educate and address their learning styles the way they want to be educated, and explore areas of disagreement openly. You want to be straightforward. You want to be open. You want to be accepting. And you need to be responsible with them. Do what you say you're going to do, under promise and over deliver. And then make sure you leave time in the negotiation for breaks, restroom, getting something to eat, hydration, and that makes a big difference.
Now, I think we have those documents. Can we link those, Scott, to our website?
Absolutely.
The page? Yeah, good.
Yeah.
And I have something else. I think I sent you a pocket guide on the collaboration effect. And that just has some of the key points from the collaboration effect. And it's a trifold, if I had it in paper.
Right.
And it's a front and back to it. But you have that, and I'd encourage you to share that with your audience too.
It sounds like both those things really go hand in hand, both the negotiation and the collaboration. You can't really separate those, can you?
No. When we want to collaborate with others. So I'm all about collaboration. I'm all about conflict resolution. And if you want to collaborate with others, if that's what you want to do, that's what I want to do in terms of my sales process. That's how I've been so successful with what I do. And I've learned it, I boiled it down to, and again, I like to make it 3 things because I'm a simple guy. So the element of connecting relationships and listening actively, and then educating judiciously the way they want to be educated. That's what's going to build bridges to negotiate closure.
Well, Mike, thanks so much for being with us. Any last thoughts that you'd like to leave with the audience?
Well, do keep in mind, with whoever you're working with, it's all about trust as a matter of foundation. And in order to build trust, you need to work with them and understand them and what their concerns are. Your job is to find out the expectations of that other party. What is it they want to accomplish? And then your goal is to help them with the solution. And if you are the solution, that's great. If you're not, and you can help them get the solution, they're going to remember you for a solution in the future. You want to help them define what the opportunity is. And you made comments about attitude, and you don't know what attitude is on their part until you've tried to connect with them and listen to them, and then educating them with what you could do to potentially help, or you can send them to a proper party or whatever it might be. And that's going to help you in the long term to really connect and negotiate closure with what you're trying to do in terms of your sales.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. And we will link those documents as well as your website, contact information, those sorts of things onto our show page for show number 466. So thank you again, Mike.
My pleasure. Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Bill. It's been a great morning for me.
All right. Us too. This segment of the Winning at Selling podcast is brought to you by The Art of Prospecting, Your Guide to Getting in the Door by Steve Kloida. Steve Kloida was known internationally for increasing salespeople's ability to make solid appointments with qualified prospects. You too can learn this essential skill by ordering a copy of his superb book, The Art of Prospecting, Your Guide to Getting in the Door. In this book, Steve shares the top strategies and tactics he has developed, implemented, and personally tested with more than 1 million sales and prospecting calls. You can get his book on the website, theprospectingexpert.com. In addition, check out his other great online resources. Instant Sales Coaching, which will guide you through 5 online success modules. A guided prospecting process entitled Call Reluctance Transformer, and the Magnetic Selling Strategies Workbook, a detailed step-by-step guide to increasing your sales. Get any of these valuable resources at theprospectingexpert.com.
As we close the show, our golden nugget today is from a sports agent on negotiation. And the quote is, "I have one thing that's not negotiable. I demand that I meet your interests." And I think this quote is really important because there's a rule that some negotiators say is never go first. Well, I think somebody's got to go first. Otherwise, you're sitting there staring, looking at each other.
Right.
And if you approach the negotiation with, "I have one thing that's not negotiable. I demand that I meet your interests." Now they're sharing what their interests are. And now you have to work on a way of meeting their interests, because if they don't get what they want, you don't get what you want.
Right. Well, it goes right back to what Mike talked about. It's not about us, it's about them. And if we can make it about them, then they're going to relax a little bit and we'll be able to have an open and honest negotiation rather than something full of tricks and schemes and
gimmicks.
Techniques. Yeah. So good. Well, you can find out all this information at winningatselling.com. That's our show notes. Look for show number 466, and we'll have all that contact information for Mike.
Next week, we're going to cover chapter 6 of Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play, Winning, the Art of Enabling Decisions. And our topic in our sales process is part number 6 on questioning techniques. Very, very important step.
Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.